welcome to the next in our series of Griffin Greats. I am Adrienne Finley Odell. I'm the head of school at Royce-Moore School, and I'm delighted to welcome everyone who's tuning in. Today, we have an opportunity to chat with Ben Marcus, who attended Royce-Moore through middle school. And he graduated from our 8th grade in 1998. So I think that would have made you class of 2002 for high school?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, awesome. And Ben is currently running for the State House of Representatives in Jacksonville, Florida, District 16. He's a devoted husband and father, a small business owner, and a committed community advocate. As a national service alum with AmeriCorps program and a community volunteer, Ben understands just how much can be accomplished when we all work together. He has spent his career working with clients and nonprofit organizations to realize their inherent potential and better engage constituents and stakeholders. Ben believes state legislators should first and foremost serve their constituents, and local elected bodies not get in their way or work to undermine their will. Ben is a graduate of Jacksonville University and Santa Fe College. He lives in the Sunbeam area of Jacksonville with his wife and 3 children and attends Ahavat Chesed. I probably didn't get that pronounced right. The temple, it means the temple. And he spends his free time playing drums, which is really awesome, and enjoying Jacksonville's parks with his family. Ben, welcome to Griffin Greats. We're so glad to have you with us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Absolutely.
Well, we love having you with us. I would love to start our conversation today by hearing about your experience growing up in the Chicago area and attending Royce-Moore and some of your memories from when you were younger.
Sure, absolutely. And again, thank you so much for having me, and thank you just to Royce-Moore in general, to Sarah for inviting me here. I really do consider it a pretty big honor for to be invited to this forum and be considered a Griffin Great. I think is pretty awesome. To be perfectly honest, I decided to run in this race in particular because I was really sick of my kids. The thought of my kids growing up in a society where there seems to be an inherent division between people and their government, and seems to be this invisible line that everybody has now imagined into existence that wasn't supposed to be there to begin with. And as someone who spent my career, really working with, as the bio says, but really I've worked with a lot of nonprofits in development and doing like a lot of grant writing and that sort of thing. But also a lot of my work is centered around training nonprofit organizations and stakeholders and boards and constituents and all these people who are a part of these groups, these communities, to really be able to advocate for themselves and really dig deep to find out how they can be most impactful in this sort of thing. And so I think a lot of that really does come. I grew up in Evanston, and I think a lot of it definitely came from growing up in a community as engaged as Evanston, and especially going to someplace, going to a school like Royce-Moore, which really worked hard, even in those days, worked extraordinarily hard under Dr. Becker, I believe. Dr. Becker was the headmaster at the time, to be incredibly inclusive of all families who were at that school. I was there on a scholarship. My parents both worked in nonprofits, and there was no way they were going to afford that full tuition at the time. But as I think many students at Royce-Moore, really I was the beneficiary of real generosity on behalf of alumni and community members who really appreciate what Royce-Moore does. Did for students. I know, and someone who is a huge advocate of public schools, and something I'm really running on in this platform is really making sure our public schools are well funded. At the time, and especially now still, there's a real place for schools like Royce-Moore for kids who come from all backgrounds, to be perfectly honest. But for me especially, uh, I was, I guess, early gifted. When gifted was still sort of, kind of still coming up because it was still relatively early. I was kind of in that category. I was also bullied at, in school and this sort of thing because I was just too nice and I was a little thick and I was like, this little just easy target for folks. And so Roysmore for me was a fantastic place to kind of get my feet underneath me, and these really small class sizes and getting to know everybody in the building and everybody gets to know you. And this was in the old building, right? And so I had birthday parties in the old gym. I had my bar mitzvah, not my bar mitzvah party there, not like immediately after my bar mitzvah, but like the birthday party is kind of part of it for my friends, and in the gym there, which is always still a hilarious memory to me. But yeah, I mean, I think that's what it all really boils down to, is that um, uh, uh, growing up in a community, my parents obviously, I've been volunteering since I was like 7 years old. And so it's just this kind of built-in idea that community is good, and being able to see it in action has really driven a lot of my life. So.
That's amazing. And
Yeah.
so you had this, real penchant for service, and that I understand that grounding really informed your decision to serve in AmeriCorps. You want to
Right.
talk about that experience?
Sure, absolutely. So, after high school, I thought I was going to be a musician. I play drums, as was mentioned in the bio. Started playing drums when I was in fourth grade. Actually, I wasn't taking, and I'm blanking on the individual who I was taking it from, but it was a local Evanston shop where I started taking drum lessons. And took drum lessons almost all the way through high school, and really thought this is what I was going to do. I was going to be a studio drummer. um, Got to a year, I went to Columbia College Chicago for a year after high school, and looked around and I was like, oh my gosh, all these other drum players, all these other percussionists are just ridiculously amazing.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, some of these folks have amazing natural talent and ability that I may have maybe some good natural rhythm, but when it comes to, actually playing the drums, it's something I have to work on, and, all this. And so, I was at the same time, I was really looking for an opportunity to grow, not just not just in a professional capacity, but in a more team-oriented kind of capacity, to understand what I'm good at and what I can, and kind of where I fit in on teams and this sort of thing. And AmeriCorps seemed really attractive to me. So I applied to a whole bunch of different programs around the country. I applied to some, what is the name of the, Public Allies is the name of one of the programs that I applied to with, in a few different cities, and then City Year in a couple of cities. And City Year was the first one to respond in DC. And so I ended up in DC doing AmeriCorps for that first 10-month period. Which was just amazing. And I actually met my now wife there.
Wow,
Which
really
was pretty
amazing,
amazing.
Ben, for sure.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
May I ask
Absolutely.
what you were doing when you were working with them?
Sure. So at the time, City Year, so now I'm sure people who are listening in are familiar with the organization City Year in some capacity. It's very active there in Chicago, especially. Um, but now City Year is really focused on in-classroom service, and that's kind of like what they do all the time. When I was a Corps member back in 03, 04, it was a series of teams that you would join that focused on different activities, and a lot of it dealt with kids, but it was very much, there's a little bit more diverse of activities. And so my team in particular was called the Civic Engagement team, and we put together once a month big community service projects where we recruit people from the community and bring them in for this great opportunity to really serve. And we put together these huge, all these different activities, and get all the supplies, get almost all this in-kinded and all this amazing stuff, which was just so much fun. And what it really demonstrated to me what it reinforced in my head was, again, this power of community, and this idea that if you could really boil down, if you could get the science down behind how do you actually get something rolling, be it a project or something at the ballot box, right? If you can kind of get the process locked down and recruit the right kind of initial change agents to your team, you can kind of really get the ball rolling and have it basically become self sufficient, or really moving by itself. So it was fantastic, really a fantastic eye-opening experience for me. Absolutely.
I bet. And was there, someone along the way there that served as a mentor to you? I mean, in my life, I can think about, kind of key people I've met along the way that
Sure.
really took an interest in me and helped me pursue different aspects to my career.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I would say while I was in AmeriCorps, again, the way it was set up, and it's still set up this way now, but you basically have, um, and everybody is an adult, but you're 18 to 24 years old. There's typically, an adult basically who's in charge. Back then it was called a project manager. But it's someone who's typically, and not always, but typically in their late 20s, early to mid 30s, not too far away from age wise, but the people who really have the responsibilities, and like you gotta complete this, and you're held responsible for it, and this sort of thing. While a core member, obviously you're there to do good work, a lot of it, especially at the time, was very much revolved around me as a core member as well, and how to build me up as a core member and a leader. And it was recognized that it was an experience for me. It wasn't just a job, if that makes any sense.
Right.
And so that project manager is the one who's basically held responsible for actually getting the work done. And she was, it's this woman named Jeanette Lang Harrington, who now lives in Massachusetts, and she's a fantastic, brilliant woman, who really kind of, she was one of these amazing leaders who knew how to take a raw kind of product of core members on her team. There was 8 of us on this little team, and knew how to take us and turn us into like this, just service project machine. It's like once a month, we're going to have service projects. You're going to bust them out. We're going to maybe even do 2 a month, and like, we're going to get this down to perfect art, so everybody had their role. And we checked in with each other, right? My role was to be in charge of reaching out to businesses and corporations and recruiting their support, which was pretty fun. And then also kind of some general media relations work as well, which I thought was just so, I think back to it, it's like 19-year-old Ben, and it's like, at the time I didn't fully understand what I was good at, but she kind of saw that.
It sounds like that set you on a path for some of your development work.
Yeah, exactly. That was the thing, is it's hilarious. It's like, my goodness, like you saw exactly kind of, where I should be headed when it comes to, and not to toot my own horn that I'm some sort of great whatever, but, I have found my ability, I have found it easier than most, I think, to have conversations in that kind of have my foot in both worlds, if that makes any sense. Is be able to communicate a business message, but very much be grounded in a community message, if that makes, or a community perspective, if that makes any sense. So yeah, absolutely, she was fantastic. I would absolutely agree with that.
That's great.
Yeah.
So fast forward, you went to college. What did you study in college?
So I got an associate's in sociology, and then I got my bachelor's in social sciences because it was just the quickest route out, and then a master of public policy, which has been useful, especially in the quantitative analysis side of things. That's for sure. But yeah, so and while I was in college, I was incredibly involved in student government. Got incredibly involved in student government. And while I was interested in the campus-based stuff, I really got into it to have an excuse to go and be a lobbyist, basically, on behalf of the students, on behalf of the school. And I did a lot of that when I was here, in school earlier on. Is I spent a lot of my time in Tallahassee every legislative session, either representing the school or I was, the vice president of the statewide, the college system, the statewide college system, Student Government Association. And in that capacity, I represented about 1 million students in Florida, in Tallahassee, for a couple legislative sessions. And we really drove that message home, is that these are not, and not only is it just 1 million college students, but because it was a community college, even though a lot of them offered 4-year diplomas as well, you're almost guaranteed that the vast majority of those are going to be voters, and the average age of student trends a little higher. And so they weren't just students, right? These are like people that you really have to pay attention to as a legislator, because they're also probably voters who live and will stay in your district, if that makes any sense. And so, yeah, it
A
was,
lot of
yeah, that was,
experience in advocacy and service, both,
yes.
right?
I know. And now all of a sudden now I'm
Good
doing
training
this. And
ground for what
yeah,
you're doing now.
yes.
So how does that happen that um, you decide that you want to pursue public office?
I tried
How did
to,
that come about?
yeah, I mean, to be perfectly honest, I tried so hard to find somebody else to run for office for 6 months before I ever jumped in. I was involved in politics for a number of years, working on campaigns since way back, and since 2004. I had been working on campaigns in some capacity, in a paid capacity, um, and then volunteering and that kind of thing as well. But really, considered myself a campaign professional for a number of cycles there. And when we moved to Jacksonville in 2014, I really took it as an opportunity to have a nice clean break with that. It's a fantastic ride when you're a young person, and I would advocate with any young person that's out there that's thinking about campaign life, definitely pursue it. It is an incredibly fun ride. At a certain point, though, when you want to settle down and have kids and do all these things, it becomes a lot more cumbersome to really pursue that lifestyle with gusto, if that makes any sense. It's very
Mm-hmm.
much it's very much actually pretty honestly, very similar to AmeriCorps, in the sense that typically it's kind of like long hours on small teams of folks, and you have these kind of set goals, and you're out there, especially in the work that I was doing, very much out there and talking to people and trying to get people to do things. So it's very similar to that, but it's a fantastic ride for folks. So I would first and foremost just say, before I go and badmouth that lifestyle, right, that is a fantastic ride if you're a young person, especially, and are really interested in politics and in public, and just in community action in general. You can learn a lot from it. But all that being said, but when we moved here, I was 30 years old. Yeah, I was 30 years old. We had a couple kids at that point, and it was already a pretty rough ride for the couple years before that, in trying to maintain a high quality, separation between work and life, or between work and my work and my personal lives, and all that. And so we really took it as an opportunity to try and find something else to do. And so I got really more into the nonprofit consulting side of things and the grant writing side of things. I had been doing lots and lots of presentations on something called asset-based community development for a long time. It actually grew out of, it was the ABCD Institute was there at Northwestern University for many, many years. And now it's, I think, at DePaul. I think it was moved a little bit more, a little bit south, but still right there. But the idea is to really look at a community as a series of assets, and not a series of problems to solve, if that makes any sense. To try and take a different approach to service delivery and to how policy is designed and these sorts of things. So instead of looking at money being expended to solve a problem, you're looking at it being expended as an investment in a person and in someone's community, right? The idea is to really try and reframe the conversation into one that values an individual and what they can bring to society, and even put the onus on government to help that individual figure out what they're good at, right? To kind of best fulfill that investment, if that makes any sense. So all that to say is that I got really into that side of consulting for a little while. My dad and I actually started a travel related business, unfortunately, a year ago, where we send social service professionals on learning tours, which is a lot of fun. But all that to say is I tried to find somebody for 6 months to run, and nobody materialized. And I was asked by a whole bunch of folks to be like, hey, listen, you've asked around now for 6 months, no one's going to show up. You got to just do this. And so that's really why I'm running, from a kind of push perspective. But as I mentioned earlier, from a philosophical perspective, it's very much because I'm just sick of folks just kind of filling seats and not really doing their job. So anyways,
Right.
very
So,
long-winded answer.
well, no, I mean, it's great to kind of frame up what
Yeah,
the path is. I recently watched the Netflix documentary Knock Down the House about
sure.
AOC. And, I think there can be this mindset of, well, why me?
Mm-hmm.
And she talked about it, that people would ask her, well, who are you? Who are you to be
Mm-hmm.
running for Congress? And, the answer is, well, who am I not to be doing that?
Exactly. Exactly.
So, I think it takes great courage to step forward and say, I want to serve my community. I want to serve
Sure.
my state. I want to serve my country. And it's a hard, hard job to do.
Tell me
And
about it.
you
Yeah.
subject yourself to all kinds of criticism. So I
Yeah.
applaud you for putting yourself out there, because we need great people to step up and serve, and we
I
need
appreciate
people
it.
to be engaged in our democracy.
Yeah, I
There's
appreciate it.
a lot of apathy out there. So,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate that. I would say, the fundraising is the worst part, to be honest, to be perfectly honest,
Well,
as it
and
is for most.
you've made a very clear, delineation in the sand with respect to your fundraising. Do you want to talk
Right.
about that?
Sure, absolutely. Absolutely. A big part of what I see as as a problem, as many people recognize as a problem in our public policy in general, is this existence of um, I guess, overbearing special interest influence, and most of it is driven by their ability to make huge campaign contributions to folks. And here in Florida, there is a line for individual campaign contributions to campaign accounts, but politicians are allowed to also have separate political committees, which they can take in unlimited money to all the time. So it completely makes the idea of having campaign finance law pointless.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. And so to me, it's really a situation where, and there's plenty of very well-intentioned politicians that also have political committees and all this. But the fact of the matter is that in the fundraising game that they're trying to play in, it's just simply never going to be equal. That, the folks who are working on behalf of folks who stand to to make a whole lot of money from policy going a particular direction are always going, as long as it's going to put them a little bit more in the black, right? And through that investment, they're going to make that investment because that's how business works. And so for me, it's really important to draw that line in the sand and demonstrate that it's okay and it's possible to run a campaign financed completely by people, and really leading by example is really what it comes down to. So,
Right, so let's get down to brass tacks. What kind of money is needed to run for a state office position like that?
so it varies state to state. I've actually managed the state house race in Glenview
Oh,
a few years back, and so I'm pretty familiar. It's it was a number of years ago, and so I'm sure the price tag has gone up a little bit. But typically for these kind of races, you're looking at somewhere between $75,000 and $100,000 to have a fully built out. And obviously, the more you can raise, the better it's going to get for you. But that's kind of the bare. To be able to have a full-time campaign manager or somebody who fills that role, and have advertisements and all these kinds of things, it's typically what you're looking at. So
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
it's it can be rough, and let's just put it like this: some states like Illinois are much better, especially if you're running as a Democrat. The Democratic Party is built out in a way which will assist in a lot of your fundraising efforts. Unfortunately, Florida is not as developed as a state party, and so it's a little bit more difficult to get your kind of baseline numbers down, if that makes any sense. I'm sure people who work in it's very similar to nonprofit development in a lot of ways. you know, because you're selling a mission, you know, and you're really, you know, you have to show up with at least some sort of quantitative data to say, hey, look, no, I promise this is a good idea. But most of it is based on story and convincing folks and, you know, having the testimonials and these sorts of things. You know, the numbers are really there just to back up the stories. Oftentimes, unfortunately, in, you know, a lot of development circles, for many, many years, it was flipped. Is that people would kind of present the numbers and then have a few stories to back it up. And it's like, no, you're doing it wrong, at least from an advocacy perspective, government advocacy perspective. So yeah, you know, that's really what it is. It can be pricey. When you're running in a relatively tough district, it can be difficult to convince people of that mission. But people, you know, it's incredibly inspiring and humbling. It's been an incredibly inspiring and humbling process for me. I very much thought I was out of politics a number of years ago. I wanted to just be done with it completely. I was, you know, finished with the arguing and everything. I get very inspired by people feeling like they can make a difference through the process. And again, really trying to break through, like I talked about earlier, that kind of invisible barrier between people and government, and understanding that that's a construct that we maintain in this country, that unfortunately a lot of consequences are playing out right now as a result of. So, you know, so that's a big part of my mission in general in this race. It's just trying to help prove that it can be a, you know, normal person.
Right.
You know, we don't have a lot of money. We don't have, you know, we have 3 kids and trying to figure it out, and a lot of student loan debt and all this ridiculousness,
Yeah.
right? But something had to be done. You know, people with ethics and accountability, who actually put ethics and accountability really first, I think, need to step up and run for office. So
you're running against a 2-term incumbent.
Yes.
Running against a Republican. You're on the Democratic ticket.
Sure.
What kind of support is there from Democratic circles in your district?
Sure. So I would say, again, you know, how do I put it? Jacksonville politics is really interesting, and for many, many years, I've actually been a registered NPA for many, many years. Even when I was running campaigns, most of which were Democratic, I was still very much a registered NPA, because party politics in general really drives me nuts. I think the conversation, unfortunately, our system was set up to, and not unfortunately, fortunately, our system was set up to represent geographically defined districts, which really kind of demands that there's a level of equity and consensus that has to be found in order to write good policy. But unfortunately, private organizations, which are the parties, have really taken over a lot of the kind of work that would be done in a more nonpartisan setting in a legislative capacity, is really done in a more partisan setting before it even makes it to a committee or anywhere else to be worked out. And unfortunately, and I know it's a little high level, but, you know, really what it boils down to is, you know, that legislators nowadays really struggle with this idea that they represent all constituents and not just a particular party. And it's been difficult. It's been a difficult process, I think, you know, and I am running as a Democrat. To be, you know, I definitely understand the Democratic Party, and at this point in history, there's a lot of things that I agree with the Democratic Party. If I had my druthers, in a perfect world, I think everybody would be running as independents for these seats, in a perfect world. But, you know, all that to say that I have found significant level of support from certain circles of the Democratic Party. I think my message on special interests scares perhaps some portions of that base, not necessarily in a horrible way, but in just kind of a, oh gosh, this guy is not gonna, you know, necessarily play the same kind of ball that we want to play, kind of capacity. And so it's been difficult on that level, but we've been able to fundraise all that we've needed to run that professional campaign. A lot of people have stepped up. I do have Jacksonville's in a really interesting place in a corruption level. There's a couple of high level kind of corruption issues that are happening here in the city. And so there's been kind of this civic reawakening among folks who, you know, the more business minded folks who, you know, it's an organization here in town called the Civic Council, which is made up of people who are very wealthy. And they've pushed for pretty good ideas for the city for the most part, but oftentimes it trends towards a very particular kind of outcome. But over the past couple of years, in response to a lot of the corruption issues here, the whole attitude has changed in a lot of circles in the city. And there's a much more kind of a willingness to kind of put your foot out there and, and do what's right, if you will, instead of what your party is telling you or whatever. So it's been an interesting ride, to say the least. So yes, absolutely.
Yeah, great. So if I were at one of your campaign events,
Yes.
what would be the key things that you would want me to take away regarding your platform?
Sure. I mean, so from the beginning, the three issues that we were really running on were education, fully funding public education, but just education across the board. Making sure that our infrastructure is shored up, particularly our drainage systems ahead of sea level rise, which is a huge issue here in Jacksonville.
Yeah.
Like $3.5 to $4 billion worth of, it's like a crazy problem that we have to handle. And so shoring up drainage, particularly in this district, is a big issue. And then really digging into that special interest money issue in particular, and shutting off the, making it so that you can't just subjugate campaign finance law by having your own, some other organization collecting the money for you. Is just really unfortunate. So
yeah,
those are kind of the three that I focused on from the beginning. Absolutely. Yeah.
So
ethics and accountability are kind of the top line issues. So
great. So we talked a little bit about that piece, the ethical piece. Let's talk about the climate change.
Sure.
And the infrastructure. That's a big number you talked about in terms of what is needed
here.
In Jacksonville. Can you describe some of the impact that you're seeing there?
Yeah, absolutely. So Jacksonville has been estimated to be the most expensive city on the East Coast, just up and down the East Coast, when it comes to climate change mitigation, and it's because of all the sea level rise mitigation in particular, but as a result of climate change, because of how many rivers and estuaries and streams and everything that are here, which make the city gorgeous. It's called River City because it really, it's just one of these places where you can be in a neighborhood and kind of turn a random corner and it's just like this ridiculous, little vista area of a little grassland. It's just ridiculous. But as a result, we have a lot, and because the St. Johns River, which is the big river that runs through Jacksonville, is connected directly to the ocean, obviously. There are already existing issues with the salinity in the river. There's a huge port here in Jacksonville, and went through a dredging project a number of years ago, which has been scientifically proven and ended up not being so hot for the rest of the river, unfortunately. And there's now talk of kind of doing it again, which is a really difficult issue to balance because there are so many people whose employment is tied directly to the existence of the port. And so just kind of ending it immediately is just not an idea that, needs to exist. But there seems to be this insistence that we have to keep up with the Joneses, and it's just not, we're going to put all this money into deepening the port. It's going to have a significant environmental impact when the city already faces billions of dollars worth of environmental mitigation costs that we're going to, so there's seawalls that have to get built in certain areas. The naval bases here, there's a couple of naval bases here, and they've already very much started to move entire buildings back from the coast. Yeah. It's like, so there's a number of neighborhoods which already flood every single time it rains, when there's a bit of a downpour, let alone an actual storm comes through. Anytime in the past few years when there's been a storm, there are certain neighborhoods that are just out of commission for weeks because they're either flooded or whatever else.
Isn't that true for a lot of Florida? I mean, I
yes.
was sharing with you earlier, I moved to Evanston from St. Pete, Florida.
Yeah.
And we were only just a few inches above sea level.
Yep, absolutely.
The whole area. Yep. And, Florida is they used to joke and probably still joke about Florida being, let me sell you some land in Florida. Ha ha.
Yeah, absolutely.
Swampland.
Yeah.
A lot of reclaimed land, but there's not a lot that's very high above sea level. And then you have sea level rise. how much are you just fighting a losing battle?
Right. I mean, there's certain parts of the state when you look at a you look at a projection map. It's just it doesn't really matter what you do. For example, take the Everglades for example, right? I mean, the Everglades are already underwater. It's
It's
just
meant to be. The Everglades were,
exactly
it's a barrier protection,
exactly
for the rest of the land. That's what it's meant to be. It's meant to
right,
hold, it's meant to be a big sponge, right? To hold water.
right. Right, exactly. And so it's just areas like that where there's been development kind of on the outskirts of those areas, which are just, which are clearly just not gonna be there anytime soon. You have a number of the kind of barrier islands that have already kind of experienced um, a lot of issues along their coastline. There are some islands in the Gulf along the Gulf Coast, kind of south of Panama City in this whole area. That used to be spots where people would buy vacation houses and would go there, and they're all basically underwater at this point, or almost all. And so yeah, it's going to be a situation where significant portions of the state are just unsalvageable. But I do think there are definitely portions of the state, and even in St. Pete, where you are pretty close to the coastline. I think there are, or to the waterline, I should say. There are definitely ways to preserve significant portions of the city. Um, uh, uh, but it is a reality, especially in Jacksonville, where there are certain neighborhoods and parts of the city that just are going to have to be bought out and turned into natural mitigation spots. Which will be gorgeous and nice parks, but it's going to be, again, very expensive to handle all this. So. And meanwhile, you have people who are just making ridiculous, there are a lot of, the state is a bit of an enigma because I think, as we talked about earlier, this is very interesting state where there's a very strong environmentalism movement kind of across party lines. But when you get into the nitty gritty of talking about, well, why is climate change happening, for example, then it just starts getting into this mess of a conversation. And so, I've been happy to see that a lot of the strategy in messaging has changed recently in Florida, specifically to just be like, hey, listen, we can argue about why all day, but like, this is going to be underwater. Yeah. Right. So like, we have to do something here.
Right.
And I mean, another a problem that really, a compounding problem here in Jacksonville, especially but this problem exists in other areas of the state as well, but just in Jacksonville in particular, is the use of septic tanks and well water systems. It's really a unifying issue here in Jacksonville. Obviously this is an issue that you'd expect in impoverished parts of town for all sorts of historical reasons that exist across the country. But those septic tanks, there are so many, even in my district, where there are extraordinarily wealthy neighborhoods, because they're so old. A lot of these neighborhoods were built in the 40s or maybe even earlier. They have no drainage. They have septics in the ground. They have, still connected to well water. And that in and of itself is something that I think can be a bridge for a conversation about what to do about things. And same with the issue of getting seawalls up and these other sorts of things, because again, every time it rains or something, it's not just the impoverished neighborhoods that get messed up, although they oftentimes do. It's as well, it's plenty of very well-to-do neighborhoods and properties that also get really messed up every single time it rains because the drainage systems are so awful. So yeah.
There's a question that came up while you were talking about how the Keys are doing. If you have any idea about this, I mean, certainly they're very close to sea level.
Yeah.
So, what's happening down there? If you care to talk about that.
So I would say one of the big issues that Florida faces in general when it comes to sea level rise is this issue of getting sand dunes repaired after a big weather event. And in the Keys, and especially, that's becoming increasingly important because they are it's slowly kind of creeping up. It's not quick enough where it's happening overnight, but every time there's a big weather event, it kind of like creates a situation where it can suddenly
like
make
one
things
coming
much worse.
right now.
Yeah, like exactly. I mean, this is the beginning of I saw a hilarious map where it's basically just these, disturbances over East Africa and into the Atlantic that then organize themselves into what become
Yeah, this is
hurricanes.
the time of year going into, September, I think, is typically the height, and then
Yep,
all the way into October,
yep,
just one after another, typically with the hurricane season.
yep, exactly. But all that to say that after Irma a couple of years ago, they got really screwed up, and it took them a while to get back. And there was this kind of nervousness that, oh gosh, if we can't, especially with the sand dunes, if we can get them replenished in time, and there's another big storm before we can get them replenished, like that can, start destroying people's, like, just the entirety of properties,
Yeah.
which has already happened in some areas of the Keys, but not, they've been able to protect themselves on a certain level, but after Irma, I mean, the road in was messed up, so they were even just kind of out there, by themselves for a while.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, this is gonna be a real rough, for Florida and for other coastal communities in general, especially like Louisiana, because of the nature of the southern half of their state. Um, in some parts of the Carolinas, it's really going to be a rough couple of years, a rough couple of decades, I should say, when it comes to figuring out what the heck they're supposed to do with zoning, with um, with what they do with their infrastructure. I mean, access to fresh water is a big issue here as well, as you may or may not
Yeah,
know.
sinkholes.
Um,
We,
mhm,
have
exactly.
major issues with sinkholes there because, ground, so you have the sort of double whammy and water issues,
Yep.
one being the sea level rise
Yep.
from, salt water, but then with the growing population in Florida,
Yep.
you have a greater demand on groundwater. And even
Exactly.
as much rain and whatnot there is, you're building more and more wells and pulling that out. And
That's exactly
and have
right.
huge sinkholes
Yep. No,
swallow
and that's
up homes and roads and
yeah. And I mean, if you look at if you pull up a map of my district, or if you pull up a map of Jacksonville, my district is the southeast part of it. And so you'll see that there's this huge undeveloped area of it. It's called E-Town. It's been purchased by a developer, right? But it's like a 30, 40-year project to build it out. But this is a natural watershed. It has been there forever. It's never been developed. And Jacksonville sits right on top of the aquifer. And so it very much is it's like it basically hits us in four different and it's a big issue here in Jacksonville. And so it's part of what I'm running on. Not as, let's just say, I didn't prioritize it in kind of my top three things, because to kind of be the most effective in kind of communicating a campaign message, right? But um, that issue of overdevelopment and really insisting on green building techniques and getting rid of as many harmful chemicals as is humanly possible from roofing materials and road materials that go into making roads and these sorts of things, is a huge priority for me. And I've seen recent reports that suggest that area is built out any more than one house every 5 acres. It could have, like, dire consequences for everybody in the next 20, 30 years. Um, so yeah, this is gonna be a rough ride for Florida for the next few decades, I think. Because you don't want to turn away new people, but at the same time, it's kind of
right.
like, well, our state is kind of struggling with this thing, going underwater. So
Yeah.
trying to figure that out yeah, it's going to be
Well,
interesting.
you were mentioning earlier how there's more people coming in and also young people are choosing to stay.
Yes.
What about
Yep.
those young people who are really charged up about climate change and wanting to try to make a difference? They're too young to vote, but they're real warriors, for
Yeah.
the environment and for social justice, because that's a big
Right.
issue for us right now too. And of course,
Right.
in Florida, we had the Trayvon Martin case and the Stand Your Ground law. Um, there are all kinds of issues for you as a potential state rep that
Absolutely.
would be engaging in. So what would you say to young people in terms of how they should get engaged?
Sure. Absolutely. Well, I mean, I think uh, it's always been about service to the community, and so I think that's always a place that any young person can start on their journey, is by getting involved in direct service organizations. Is more than just a casual volunteer who kind of shows up every once in a while, but really digging in deep, choosing that one or two organizations in your general vicinity. That could be anything from, I got really involved in an after school literacy program in high school, for example, where I walked over to an elementary school every day after school and spent, an hour reading to a third grader, and then I would just go home and continue on upon my, continue on my day. But those kind of, I think it's undervalued how impactful that kind of service can be to a community, and to that organization, and to the conversation that's happening around you, by getting directly involved in the work that's already going, or is trying to get ramped up. Not at all to say that starting something new is a bad idea. There are many times where that's incredibly important to getting things moving. But I think oftentimes, and I can speak from a place of, when I was a younger person, and was very much interested in politics. I was very much a, shun the system kind of guy, and like, we just got to get down to business and do right. And it took me a while to wake up and realize that, well, we live in this representative democracy where, at the end of the day, if you really want to change things, it has to be through legislation that's presented by politicians that we elect to office. And so, instead of kind of villainizing the whole system, I really, over many years, my take on it really took to let's redefine what it means to be a politician, or redefine the term politician, because it's a necessary role that we have to have in our society. And so I think, as a young person, establishing a base of service in your own life and in your community is incredibly important. When you then go on to those conversations in politics, people take you much more seriously if you come in with your hands dirty, so to speak, into conversations. And so, again, not to say that starting something new is a bad thing. Sometimes, again, it's very much necessary. But if you can come in demonstrating that you have committed yourself to this kind of a mission, and that you've gotten your hands dirty, that can really add to your clout when you get into those conversations. Yeah. And I think earlier on, what I said is, I think earlier on, one of the examples that I gave before it started, is that when I was growing up in Evanston, I volunteered at the Cole Children's Museum when it was on Green Bay. When I was like a kid, when I was like 12 years old, 13 years old. I think I maybe even 11, but it was for like a 3 or 4 year period of time there. Yeah, I was a young kid. I was totally a kid. I was totally, a kid that could have just been playing in the museum. You know what I mean? Who put on one of the volunteer smocks and was like, okay, I'm a volunteer now. But because I was actually legitimately a volunteer there, I would, work in the gift shop, and I'd go and help clean things up. And I was like, helping to do art projects with the kids and all these things. I would get invited into conversations about how the museum should behave, even as a child, even as a 12 or 13-year-old. I was invited into these spaces, these planning spaces, because I had the perspective. And because my hands were dirty, they were willing to kind of, at least, to take my opinion with much more than just a grain of salt, because I knew exactly what was going on.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing from you is, encouraging young people to show up, right?
Yes.
Show up, because, your age is just a number.
Absolutely.
It's about, showing up and saying, hey, I do want to count here. I do want to make a difference, and finding opportunities to do that. We have about 10 minutes left of this, and I want to encourage anybody who's listening, if you have questions, put the questions in the chat or in the message board on Facebook Live, and Sarah will field those to us. But
I'll also just add on to that, though, that it is usually in most states. I'm pretty sure in Illinois it's okay for kids under 18 to be to volunteer for political campaigns. That's always something that I encourage as well. Sign up if you have the ability. Sign up for your state's PAGE program in the state capitol. Usually you can get sponsored by a state representative or a state senator, and they have a limited number of PAGE positions. That there's all sorts of ways. Student government, like I mentioned. and take it seriously, I guess is, what I'd say is, even in high school when you can't vote, right, there's still opportunities for you to really kind of push yourself in connecting with others and figuring out where people are coming from. So.
It's a great point. It was in a conversation we had last month on our critical conversations on race and social justice. In the aftermath of George Floyd's murder, and we wanted to engage in that conversation. Jonathan Holloway was one of our speakers, and he was encouraging people to get involved, not just get charged up about presidential elections.
Absolutely.
But your point, like you're running for a state office, and
right.
it's also the judges. It's also
absolutely.
All of the political system is important to engage in, because
absolutely.
That old saying of all politics is local.
Absolutely.
It starts, and it starts at the local level. So if you really want to make a change, start local, start, where you're in your community, how you can engage in your community.
Exactly.
There.
No, I think it's really unfortunate how undervalued state government has become in a lot of ways, because there's so many, as a nonprofit leader, right? You are very well aware, that state politics plays a huge role in everybody's day-to-day life. And so I think it's really fascinating that in our country, and for, I went through all the ologies in college, but I was a political science, there's some political psychology. If that was one, I probably would have ended up there, because that's kind of, people's behavior in politics is fascinating to me. And that you can see all around them, okay, that pothole's been there, for 3.5 months, like no one's fixing it, but then, you have municipal turnout in 20%, 30%. And it's like, well, hold on a second. Like, if you want to fix the pothole, you got to have people who are going to be screaming about the pothole. And this is how you get things done in this country, and so, I make that point all the time to folks, and especially, when you're looking at issues like gerrymandering, people will complain about gerrymandering, how these districts are so unfair. And a big part of what we're seeing at Congress especially is the direct result of gerrymandered districts, how difficult it is to actually have proper equitable representation in legislative bodies, comes from the way that the district lines are drawn themselves. And that power is reserved for state legislators, state legislatures, both for districts within a state, but then also congressional districts as well. All that is reserved for state legislatures. And so I think a lot of people don't understand is that every 10 years, those lines are redrawn. And that's kind of the moment, right, at which you can kind of end gerrymandered situations. And so anyways, there's a lot of very impactful decisions that are made on the state level that really are passed over, unfortunately, or taken as kind of secondary or a tiered, you know what I mean? Well, they're just going for the federal office. Like, no, it's a totally separate thing. State government, federal government, separate things. Work together, separate things. Anyways.
So that we have another question that has
Absolutely.
been posed. And actually, I was thinking about this myself as we were talking before about service and young people. We're in this really difficult time right now with COVID.
Absolutely.
We're not, we have to social distance, we have to wear masks, and even, with all of the protesting that was going on, there were a lot of people who wanted to get out and protest, but were really concerned about exposing themselves to, potential COVID positive people. So
absolutely.
What advice would you give to a young person in this moment if they want to engage in whatever, and whether it's climate change, whether it's social justice, whether it's their local politics,
sure,
to do that safely?
Sure. Well, speaking from a campaign perspective, we've been doing all sorts of virtual phone banking, which is a pretty easy thing for people to get into, and I'm sure local campaigns are doing the same thing. Absolutely. And so if people want to get involved in a campaign, a local campaign, that there's almost always, if they're doing their job right as a candidate, there will be good virtual options to get engaged and, you know, have an opportunity to connect with voters and do these sorts of things. That's for sure. There are some organizations that are still doing direct service, like Meals on Wheels and these other sorts of things, that have created really strong social distancing kind of processes in place in order to protect everybody. You know, kind of situation where you're just leaving the meal and kind of backing up and making a phone call to make sure that they got it and kind of visually checking it. It's unfortunately not as right. And so there's opportunities there if you're not in a category that you could potentially be, you know, suffer significant consequences from being exposed. There are plenty of physical direct service opportunities that still have to get completed somehow. But not at all to, you know, to say that people need to put themselves at risk. And then there's all sorts of ways online to really engage, especially young people. So here in Florida, a big issue that exists here in Florida is access to mental health services. It's a huge issue here in Florida in general, but then also in Duval County, where Jacksonville is, as well. We're talking about, you know, bottom of the lists kind of situations. And so I'm a big advocate for maintaining regular connection with your friends and classmates, and really making sure, trying to be, you know, a great leader is not somebody who is necessarily going to say something controversial and take a hard line and be aggressive. Sometimes a great leader is someone who everybody knows is going to have their back. And, you know, there's no better way to really demonstrate that leadership than in embodying, right, what a good community should be. And so, you know, in my opinion, the best thing that kids can do, especially at this time, young people in general, but especially folks who are stuck in the house, is to really make sure that they're maintaining a connection with their friends and their schoolmates, and checking up on people and making sure they're all right, and asking those questions. So anyways,
so important. That's so
yeah.
important. I do worry in this time of social distancing and with schools operating remotely, the toll that it's taking on everyone, and that mental, I think that's one of the next big crises that we're going to face. You know, our local high school here just a couple of weeks ago announced it's going to start the school year fully remote. And I put myself in the place of those high school kids, you know, particularly kids, you know, going into their senior year. It's their senior year, and
I know it's hard.
They're involved in some sports, or maybe they're involved in student government or whatever. And there's just so much that's been lost in this time of COVID, and trying to keep those connections, to your point, so critical to, because we're social beings. You know?
Exactly.
So we need them. And, you know, for those of us who have the opportunity to, you know, connect with others, that we feel comfortable doing that, reaching out, making sure people are okay. You know, I would encourage them to do that, to your point. Yeah. Well, Ben, this has been such a great conversation.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely.
I feel like we could keep talking for
this is great.
another hour. But everybody has been so kind to tune in and to ask questions. And we wish you the very best with the election.
Thank you very much.
We'll be watching with great interest and cheering you on. If we could vote for you from here, we would, but I don't think our votes would count.
Unfortunately not. Yeah, unless you're actually live in Florida. Yeah.
A few folks watching on Facebook have said the same thing. So I also I would be remiss if I didn't tell you that Joe Heidemup says hello. I don't know if it's a real last name, but that's what he said. So he's like, "Hi Ben, how you doing?" And we're just all really, this was a really great conversation to listen to, and really inspiring. So thank you very much, Ben, for agreeing to be on our Griffin Great series.
I appreciate it. Absolutely.
And for everybody watching, I just want to let you know that the next session will be September 12th at 5 o'clock, and it will be with Shamar White, class of 1995, who is a playwright, screenwriter, and television writer, and also was the daughter of the very famous Lester White. So hope you all can tune in for that. And Ben, thank you again. And Adrian, you're doing an amazing job.
It's been so much fun. Ben, you made it so easy. So easy.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate it. But at this point, it's been almost 8 months at this point. I better be able to answer some questions. So I appreciate it. I really appreciate you guys very much.
Well,
Thank
we're
you
really
so much.
proud of you. Griffin, great.
Thank
Charge
you so
on.
much.
Change the world.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Great.
All right.
Good night,
Thanks
everybody.
for tuning in. Take care. Be good.
Bye.